Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I don't know how many tech tests I have already done this morning. Okay, that's great that it works. So hello and welcome from our side. This is Graz, our place. You already see my colleagues waiting for our performance. And I'm really happy to introduce that we have some spontaneous guests, as we are a very open collective performing remotely with each other. We have always people that spontaneously drop in and bring in their ideas. And I'm just like shortly introducing all the people. We have today a group of people being physically present in a space in Graz, and also some people being present in a space in Vienna. And I'm going to introduce Vienna first. That's Nicole Sabella and Mohadise Siasa. And here in Graz, the group is bigger. And looking around, that's Lale Rodgakriadara, Jadi Carboni, Christopher Williams, Vera Siebert. Behind me is Peter Venus, Cosima Hubner. We have a silent listener as well, Bettina Landl, because that's one of our traditions that we always, besides performers, we have professional listeners attending our performance that are also part of our process, and Antonia Mannhardsberger. And now we are gonna perform over an audio streaming tool. I'm gonna share the link again. We chose this tool because the audio is just much better, and we ask you to click on the link to it will open automatically and you will hear the performance, and later on we are gonna gather again in Zoom. And yeah, so I hope you enjoy, and we are curious for feedback later. Thank you.
I'm going to talk about something that took place last year in lockdown. I've got a little bit of a kind of introduction, and then I'm going to play you part of the piece, and then hopefully try and explain what's going on a little bit. Steve, is there any chance you could mute? I can hear myself at the same time. That's really weird.
Of course,
Cheers. Thanks. Ooh. Oh, hang on. I need to turn off the stream as well. There we go. Ace. Cool. Okay, so this is an ensemble that I started. You can see in the background here, hopefully, a trio. We started playing together in sort of 2017, 2018. It's myself on bass and kind of pedals. Tom Seminole-Ford on guitar, and he also uses a lot of electronics, and Percy Purseglove on trumpet. And we started as a kind of a project to explore free improvisation, but also kind of using some short notated ideas that I initially created to start off, kind of glue us all together at our first meetings, our first rehearsals, I suppose. And we ended up kind of incorporating those notated pieces into what we do. And this trio has become kind of the subject of my PhD. I'm now in the third year of my my PhD, and currently writing up some of the things that I found out through doing this. So during lockdown last year, the first lockdown, we created this piece as a kind of remote collaboration between the three of us, which I'll explain how it worked in a sec. I did a lot of kind of live stream performances, solo performances. At the very start of lockdown, I was due to be part of a festival. I'd been organising a festival which was supposed to take place on March the 19th, or whenever it was that lockdown actually happened. So it's kind of, instead of doing that festival, I'd sort of dove straight into doing a streaming gig without really thinking about it, and just kind of did my very first streaming gig in March, and then I got asked to do a couple more. And then a friend of mine had this great idea to do a kind of online streaming festival, and he'd seen that I had a little bit of kind of understanding of how the technology works, so he asked if I'd perform but also help out. So I suddenly was involved in doing quite a lot of online streaming. As you can see here, this is some of the performances we did over the course of maybe, I think it was a weekend. We did a lot of stuff, and then a couple of weeks afterwards as well. And whilst it was great to sort of see all this music happening, it kind of started to show up some of the limitations of this way of presenting music to me, particularly around the the reactions to it, it sort of struck me that this was like fairly remarkable that everyone was managing to get this together, particularly spending most of my weekend days sort of organising musicians and talking them through how to stream and what settings they needed to have in OBS in order to make it work, and you know, turn your audio interface back off and on again, and let's see if we can, you know, work this out all done over the phone. And then the reactions from the audiences were, oh, this is great, but it sounds a bit rubbish, or, you know, we can't quite see. Particularly the one with Mark Sanders, which you can see at the bottom here, took an hour of me sort of talking Mark through it, and eventually we ended up FaceTiming it and streaming it via my laptop, and it was incredibly complicated. And one of the main comments was, you can't really hear the cymbals, which just sort of felt like a bit of a, you know, missing the point of what was happening. And it also kind of the performances where there happened to be two musicians living together, if they were, you know, partners or just coincidentally living together at the start of lockdown, seemed to get a lot more kind of recognition as being good performances. And there was a sort of desire to kind of, you know, go after these sort of duos, the people that were living together, and it didn't really feel for me that was a good idea to kind of, you know, foreground people just because of their life choices and give them certain opportunities just because they happen to be living with another musician. So I started thinking about other ways I could overcome this sort of live streaming problem for me. So with my trio, with Percy and Tom, we set about trying to make a piece. I want to talk about today what we did, but also how I think we did it as well. And hopefully you'll understand what I mean as I explain what's going on. First of all, I sent them this kind of very rough graphic score. It's obviously, as you can see, handwritten. I sent it to them in the post. I felt it was really important to have something physical because everything had gone online. So they received this in the post, which was essentially a set of instructions with no fixed time to reply. And what I asked them to do was to set up the audio and video recording and imagine that we were playing together as a trio and video themselves for a kind of continuous sort of roughly 40 minutes slot, which seemed to be about the time that we normally improvise for. And then once they'd done it, just to send the files back to me. My intention was that I'd use these files as a kind of to create something else out of, to chop them up. I'd done something similar already, and I wanted to kind of do that again. What I was interested in is Percy and Tom not hearing what each other had done, so they had to sit. We'd had this whole thing of like maybe we could stream it to each other, and at the time we couldn't work out a way around it. So I just asked them to imagine that we were there playing and not hear each other. And in fact, they recorded it quite far apart. Percy recorded his in April, and I think Tom recorded his in mid-May. And eventually they both sent them back to me. When I got them, I sort of dragged them into Logic, the files into Logic, to try and make, start making something out of it. And I just put them together, one on top of the other, and just sort of press play to see if what they recorded had come out okay, if there was any glitches. And they happened to play together at the same time. And the first sort of few minute or so, first few seconds, struck me as something that worked together really well, and kind of what they'd done sort of fitted without actually needing any kind of editing. So I stopped listening straight away, and set up my right pretty much where I'm sitting. I had one speaker with Tom sound in and one speaker with Percy sound in, and I improvised along with the sort of the total, I think is about 30 minutes in the end, of what they had sent, and we created this piece where three of us are playing together, but we've all created it at three separate moments. So I just wanted to show you kind of the beginning of that, and then I want to talk about how I think how it came to be together. Hopefully you'll agree it sort of comes across as a kind of coherent thing, which I'd be interested to hear whether you think it does or not. So this is the piece. Hopefully you hear it. If you don't hear it, please let me know. It starts very quietly. Okay, it starts to kind of go off into a different thing there, but that just gives you an idea of what kind of what we came up with. You can see the whole thing on YouTube. I thought it probably wasn't worth just sitting here for half an hour listening to this. So yeah, you can find that on YouTube if you like. What I want to talk about is kind of how I think this happened and what I think is going on here. And this has become like becoming the final piece of the puzzle in my PhD commentary. So it's very much on my mind at the moment. After we had all had time to watch the video, which we've just seen, we met over Zoom to discuss what had happened and how we felt at the time of putting it together and how we felt now we'd seen the sort of final piece. And there were some really interesting comments from both Tom and Percy about how they felt that the piece had come together. Percy said there were moments when you're, Chris, me, tying it together because there's a bit of space, but that would be happening anyway. And I think he meant that would be happening if we were performing together in the same room, is what we were talking about there. And he said, because of how we've played in the past, I knew that that's what would be happening anyway. There's some strange grammatical things going on here, which we'll talk about in a sec. Tom kind of said some similarly strange things. He said when Percy came in the first entry in the video, so this is after he watched it back, that's when I actually heard him coming in while I was playing. I could hear that happen. So he's talking about hearing it happen as he was recording his piece in the past, having known that Percy had recorded his thing. There's sort of some weird things going on here. And he also said this last thing that I pulled out, that other people might approach it, other musicians that is, might approach it with a contained idea of what it should be, and it wouldn't become what it actually is. So there's kind of some weird, slightly confusing grammatical structures of our sentences, which I believe it's because we're trying to make sense of what happened through our discussion. The complications drawn out through our conversation pointed to the themes emerging from our discussion, how we collectively have created a context for our music where meaning can be carved out. The people involved, us three, have shared musical experiences over a period of time, performances, rehearsals, and discussing those performances and rehearsals, building a context which we can refer to musically in the moment of performance, with those events building upon and further enriching our shared musical history. In the absence of live performances due to lockdown and an ever-approaching submission date on the horizon, I decided to use this piece as an example of the musical practice I'm describing in my PhD commentary. I also wanted to understand how it arrived at this moment from a practitioner's perspective as part of developing an ongoing artistic project. Understanding this process and how we created this video piece needed me to look at the people who made it, what it actually is, by delving into the specifics of our practice. General theories of meaning, freedom, and other such metaphysical concerns seem like an inappropriate place to start, given our shared sense that this piece was so entwined with our very real individual and collective practices. In her excellent book, Revolution of the Ordinary, Toril Moi offers an account of ordinary language philosophy, which I feel serves as a good example for practice-based researchers, like me, intent on the tricky business of understanding their own practice. Moi draws on the works of a very different trio from the one presented here, Wittgenstein, Austin and Cavell, to argue for the power of ordinary language philosophy to revolutionise literary studies. Like Wittgenstein, Moi condemns our craving for generality and urges us to think through specific examples. Only when we understand how language is used in a particular context can we begin to make sense of it. To try and construct grand theories in the mould of the sciences risks ignoring the everyday use of language, where for Moi and the ordinary language trio the key to understanding lies. I wish to follow Moi's example and think through a specific example from Stielerfeld's practice in order to try and make sense of Alone Together. Although Moi, Wittgenstein, Austin and Cavell are dealing specifically with language, there are, I feel, enough parallels with Stielerfeld's musical practice for this to be an appropriate starting point. I should point out here that I'm not saying that music is capable of communicating or speaking in the same way as language, nor that I think it's possible for music to convey specific meanings through performance alone. All I wish to say that is in this example, like the Wittgensteinian view of language, music acquires meaning through its use. By examining the context within which these uses take place, we, by which I mean I, might be better equipped to show how meaning can be understood in the practice of Stielerfeld. You are then free to contrast my example of how meaning and music are related with your own examples and experiences, so that the business of philosophy might begin. The specific example I wish to explore comes from a 4-day residency that Stielerfeld undertook in October 2019. I arranged for us to play at Artifact, which is a great little cafe in Sturchley in Birmingham, on 4 consecutive days. In between each performance and at the end of the residency, we discussed the performances as well as wider aspects of our shared practice. This is a slightly unusual thing to do for a group of improvisers. It's much more common, in my experience and anecdotally, for improvisers to not really discuss performances at all, let alone revisit them in fairly minute detail. However, these discussions have become a vital part of our artistic practice, helping us to better understand the music we want to make together, as well as proving invaluable for my own research purposes. The moment I'm going to show you now is one which caught the attention of all 3 of us, as was recognised in the discussion after this gig. First, I'm going to play you a clip, context-free, as much as that's possible, and then I'll explain what's going on and show you the clip again. My hope is that by describing the context of this moment, I can begin to make sense of what's happening, as well as explain why all 3 of us felt that this moment was worth exploring a bit further. So this is a video from that gig. apologies for the way it kind of comes in quite abruptly mid performance. As you can see, we're about 20 minutes in here, but hopefully you get a sense of what's going on. I'm just going to roll it back a little bit. There we go. Hopefully you can hear this too. Seems like for me at least the video doesn't want to work, but at least hopefully you heard it and could hear that there's more than one trumpet thing going on at least, which is quite important for here. So you might have your own ideas about what's happening, and I've already given you some context to this performance and the ensemble kind of more generally. And digging a little deeper will help us to make sense of why I've highlighted this moment specifically. I decided to document these performances so that I could use them as part of my PhD submission. The videos were done fairly rough and readily with a couple of GoPros, as you can see here. I'm not the best videographer, but the audio recording was a more professional affair. I asked a friend of mine to multi-track each performance so I could listen to it more easily after the performances and kind of dig a bit deeper into it. But halfway through the residency, just before this performance, I decided to use some of the recordings taken from the first 2 days as part of the third performance, the one we've just heard an extract of. This technique had not been previously part of any of our performances as a trio, and it was not something I'd attempted before, particularly in any other setting. And that's what you can see set up here on the right-hand side of the picture, where I'm currently kind of messing with the laptop rather than playing the bass. This is what you're seeing and hearing, or well, just hearing today. There's no live sampling going on. The laptop I have set up only had a Logic project open with the multi-tracks from the first 2 performances in it. And as we were improvising in the space between 2 of the notated musical ideas we chose to use during this performance, I turned up the fader on which the trumpet recording from 2 days ago was playing. I hadn't had a chance to pre-select that extract. I didn't know what sound would emerge. It was just a kind of random click on this waveform, and I like the look of it. What you hear is us being directly confronted with our past musical ideas. In this case, it's Percy's trumpet phrases and responding to them. Percy's duetting with himself through time. So if we watch it again, I'll kind of describe what's happening. Hopefully you give you a better sense. So just that quick minute again. We've just come from a kind of the weird sort of, you can hear Percy playing in real time. The kind of weird Doctor Who-esque loop in the background is a bass loop that I just kind of set up, and Tom's playing some fairly dry acoustic guitar sound at this point. This is Percy playing in the room, as it was on the Friday night, just playing as per usual. He plays a few more phrases. I think he plays one more phrase just here, and then the next slightly different trumpet sound that you hear coming in is actually a recording from 2 days previously, which is randomly chosen. Here it comes. Percy and Tom respond to that. And then another phrase from 2 days ago. Percy and Tom kind of respond to that again. And there's another one here from 2 days ago, which kind of then sends us in this slightly different direction. So there's this kind of duet through time happening, which caught our attention. Improvisers have to face their past ideas each time they choose to play, and normally this is an internal process which in a seasoned or professional player sits in and out of consciousness, draws on experience and muscle memory as much as choice, and certainly not directly and audibly exposed to the other musicians or audience members at the time. What happened in this performance was that process laid bare as we continued to build new music related to this idea from our musical past. This moment could only have happened because of our shared musical history, because of the context we've created together, where the use of a musical phrase in time can make some sense of the choices we've made and continue to make as musicians. Everything we've done together led up to this moment, and then this moment made the transition to being part of our shared history. Something which can be re-referenced, reaffirmed, recontextualized through our ongoing musical collaboration. Understanding this moment's place in context acts as a stimulus to think about time, history, freedom, community, intersubjectivity, technology, complexity, amongst many other things. In our post-performance discussion, we all felt that something had happened around this moment, even if we couldn't readily identify exactly what it was. Percy described it as being like worlds aligning, and there was something in the coincidences of pitch, timbre, timing and tonality that led us to recognise this moment as being one of those moments in music that we search for as improvisers, an aligning of worlds or something out of the ordinary. Taken in isolation, this example has kind of very little meaning. It's only when we think through the context within which it took place that it starts to make sense and starts to make meaning as we contrast it with our past experiences of improvisation and music performance. In terms of Alone Together, the original piece, this example from our residency helps me, to think about how the context of Stielerfeld informed the creation of a collaborative piece of work made in isolation, and begin to think about what that collaboration might mean. Asking Tom and Percy to imagine that we were playing together whilst they recorded their separate versions of our collaboration was to once again confront them with our shared musical history. This connection to individual musical and personal histories was what I felt was at risk from the sudden proliferation of live streaming, which I was partly responsible for, at least locally. Whilst improvisation is often mythologized as a practice which starts from nothing by practitioners and commentators alike, an ignorance or erasure of the past, a removal of context, denies the potential for understanding, for thinking through examples. Making sense of how Alone Together came about requires an understanding of the immediate, historical and ongoing context created by Stielerfeld through our shared musical and personal experiences. The process of Alone Together extends beyond the recording and combining of individual parts. At first glance and without examining how it was created, it would be easy to assume that it was recorded in real time in separate rooms or live streamed like so many of the other lockdown video creations. Our assumption, based on experience, is that all the musicians would have been able to hear each other in some way at the very least. An examination of the context, both immediate and historical, reveals a very different example to think through, an example that can provoke philosophical thought to begin. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Amazing. Thank you. I was quite intrigued to see Stephen Lawson's name pop up as the photographing credit. His name came to mind as you were playing through some of the pieces. Okay, again, just as a reminder, then we'll be keeping the questions for the combined Q&A at the end. Sophie Louis-Stone, are you ready to go?
I am.
There we go. Right, then the platform is all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'll be talking a little bit about my project, Postcard-Sized Pieces from 2020, before introducing a new piece called Alternating Breath. And Alternating Breath stems from Postcard-Sized Pieces and was written specifically for this conference and for Zoom realization. And my approach for this 20-minute session is to workshop the piece by hopefully playing it twice, and as it hasn't been played before, and to find out the possibilities of it as well as its limitations. So I am inviting all of you here to participate if you wish, as either a listener or a breather. I do recommend grabbing headphones, as this is intended to be a quiet piece and it will allow you to listen more deeply. And for breathers, you can use your actual breath, or you may choose a sound making object or instrument which can produce quiet sounds or quite sustained sounds, but you don't need to be a musician to participate in this. I'm just going to try and drop in 2 PDF files into the chat. You don't actually need to look at these, but they are there if you want to. So first, just a little bit about me and my practice. I'm a composer of experimental music and sound artist based in Kent. I am currently in the process of doing my corrections for my PhD at Canterbury Christ Church University with Dr. Lauren Redhead. And my compositional practice is reflective of who I am, my daily life, my preferred aesthetic for musical experiences. And my music often encompasses quietness, sparseness, silence, sounds that fade to and from nothing, long durations, collaboration, and music which can be experienced in a way that the listener chooses to. And this is inspired by my love of stillness, nature, ambient music, as well as many composers and artists of the Wandelweiser network, such as Maierhofer-Lischka, Corey Reeder, Antoine Boiger, as well as Eliane Radigue and Pauline Oliveros, for example. So within my compositional process, I focus on the experience of sound, silence, and environment first and foremost. Therefore, I consider how the music will be engaged with, such as with concentrated listening, within Zoom, or in an installation environment, and the types of sounds that I would like to hear. And then I find a way of communicating this through open scores such as text and graphic notation, but also through spoken communication as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So this is just to show my general postcard size pieces. So my composition postcard size pieces I completed at the beginning of 2020 for my final piece for my PhD, and they are a collection of 30 or so small open scores which can be played in any way. They are open instrumentation and open duration, and they're to be played quietly. Postcard size pieces comprises text scores, graphic notation, hybrid staff notation, as well as blank scores. And some of the scores are quite musical, but others are based on experience and enacting a task, such as recording and presenting an outside space. So at the time of completing the set of postcards, we entered the first lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I couldn't arrange to have them played over Zoom to be played in person. So quickly I started communicating with people over Zoom, improvising with some friends, particularly the Montrose Composers Club, which is a small collective of composers and artists in East Kent. And having experimented with some of the possibilities of Zoom, I started to write versions of postcard size pieces to be played live over Zoom. So I created timeline scores with selected postcards and used the capabilities of Zoom, such as screen sharing, to share video and create audiovisual realizations of the piece. So I could have used recordings of people playing separate tracks and merged them together to create a more perfect realization. But collaboration, listening, and playing together is something that is really important to me. And Zoom was the most used and accessible platform to do this on at the time. So what I discovered and really enjoyed about Zoom is its unpredictability, fluctuating and poor internet connections, the lag, the fragmentation of sound and video, and the way that Zoom focuses on the loudest person makes for really interesting realizations, especially as my music is very quiet. And although Zoom may seem poor for more traditional musical performance, it's really a useful tool in the realization of music, which is more open. It doesn't have strict timing, such as postcard size pieces. So there's a couple of the scores on the screen. I'm just going to move on to alternating breath. So this is an idea for a new version of postcard-sized pieces, which is a realization of one specific postcard called Alternating Breath. This is very much inspired by my recent participation in New York-based ensemble 5x5's participatory performance of Pauline Oliveros' Sonic Meditations over Zoom, as well as Anton Boiger's weekly meeting called Showing Up. So Showing Up, I always call it listening in by mistake. It's a Jitsi meeting where everyone joins with their microphones turned on and their webcams off to show up and have a shared listening experience as people go about their day. So alternating breath is for both breathers and listeners. So you don't have to participate with sound if you're uncomfortable doing so, but hopefully we will have a decent amount of people wanting to participate. And yeah, I really like to do this twice if possible. To do this, we don't need to see the score. So I'm just gonna stop screen sharing. I'll give some instructions on what we'll be doing, and I will copy them into the chat now before I continue reading them out. There we go. So alternating breath is about privately alternating your breath with one other breather. So this won't be communicated and probably won't be reciprocated, but it might be. This isn't a breathing exercise, so we won't be using, we'll be using breath to create sound rather than doing a breathing exercise, because I don't want you to hold your breath and I don't want anyone feeling unwell. Breath can be interpreted as one performed breath, like but also sound making objects or instruments may be used. So I am going to be using the mouthpiece of an old wooden flute. You can metaphorically breathe or actually breathe through the instrument to mimic breath. And if you're wanting to use an instrument, try to make the sound similar each time as you would with breathing. So the process is as follows, and a little reminder again that headphones will make this an easier and better experience for you. Turn original sound on if you can. On a PC, it's at the top left, and I need to do that myself now. This will stop Zoom enhancing your sound. And on a mobile, this is under the settings and meetings. High fidelity mode in the audio settings is a really, really good choice too, but it's not necessary if you don't know how to do it. It just means that Zoom won't remove any sounds that it thinks are unwanted, because we kind of want to hear those unwanted sounds for this. Breathers and listeners, turn your microphones on, but not quite yet. If your environment is noisy, please don't turn your microphone on. But for second playing, if we find this is too disruptive, we can just have breathers with microphones on. But I would like to have both breathers and listeners with their microphones on, just so that we can listen in to our collective environment. So you've got your microphones on, and then you're going to listen and wait for a breath. So we're not going to nominate anyone to start, because I want this to take time, happen naturally. Anyone and multiple people can start first, but I feel that giving this space and time to listen is what it needs. And then once you've heard someone breathe, sorry, I can hear someone unmuted at the moment. If you could mute yourself for now, and then we'll unmute in just a little bit. Once you've heard someone breathe, you may choose to alternate your breath with them, but take your time, create space. You don't have to choose the first person you hear. We'll all choose who we want to alternate with individually, so it's not a collective decision. Continue to alternate your breath with that one person throughout the duration of our realization. If you don't hear them again, that does mean you will not be able to alternate with that person anymore, because you cannot alternate, and then you will be a listener. So we'll then do this for approximately 5 minutes, and what I'll do is I'll raise my hand like this on Zoom, just so that we know when that time comes. Wrong button. There we go. I clapped instead. So there are a few difficulties that may arise, as it's going to be hard to recognise and alternate with our chosen person over the duration, because there are many of us, we probably won't be using our eyes but rather our ears, which is why headphones work a lot better, but that's the fun of it. We have to try our very best to memorise and recognise the sound of our chosen person's breath. And we may find that multiple people alternate with the same person, which is fine because we won't be all breathing in sync at the same time anyway. So just a reminder to turn on original sound if you can. Breathers and listeners, turn your microphones on, but not yet. First, listen and wait for a breath. Anyone can start. And once you've heard someone breathe, you may choose to alternate your breath with them. Continue to alternate your breath with that one person, and then we'll end after approximately 5 minutes. So this is supposed to be quiet and spacious. Silence is never a bad thing, so don't feel that you have to fill space, as we'll be listening in to everyone's environments. And just so I am aware, I'm just going to unspotlight myself and let's view in gallery mode. If everyone knows how to do that, it's best to go to gallery mode. Just so I'm aware of how many people want to participate, could you please react with a thumbs up on the reactions at the bottom of the screen, just if you're up for making sound, and then a heart if you're up for listening and turning on your microphone only. Okay, fab, we've got some people. Okay, so does anyone have any questions before we start? Oh, okay, thank you, Andrew. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise my hand, and once I take it down, we will unmute ourselves and start breathing, and then after 5 minutes I will raise my hand again. Oh, thank you. That was really interesting to hear it for the first time. It was really lovely. I wish it went on for longer, to be honest, but we don't have much time. I think I do have 2 minutes left. Steve, am I allowed to do it another time? For 5 minutes again? Or 2 minutes?
I think that'll be fine. Yes, go on.
Thanks. Okay, we'll do it again for 5 minutes. I was just wondering, anyone who didn't have their microphone on because they're worried about their environment being noisy, I thought it'd be quite interesting to have that and hear what that sounds like, the way that it will fragment and the way that it will Zoom picks and chooses who is heard. So if you wanted to participate but you didn't because your environment is a little bit noisy, feel free to try it this time round. And I will do exactly the same again by raising my hand. Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting to hear with more people with their microphones off because it was surprisingly quiet. Microphones on even, and my alternating partner I only heard them once. I don't know if they played more than made a sound more than once, but so because of that, I think I only made one sound over the 5 minutes. But thank you all for participating.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. And thank you for everyone who participated. I would have done, but unfortunately, seagulls. So we'll move on to the Q&A, if that's okay. So we're going to combine the questions that we have for everyone into this session. And so, Margarethe, let me just quickly have a look. There's a question or two for you. You're going to find it. Here we go. Yes, Margarethe, there we go. So a question came in for you. This is from Neil Farwell. I'm going to say, Neil says, please say more about the role of professional listeners in your process.
Okay, so we're several here from the group. I think it's maybe not only me answering, but we can take turns. So about the role of the professional listener, it just came up by chance. So we started in 2019 to work together. It was even before Corona, because it was an event as part of a worldwide radio festival, and this made the radio orchestra start. And in radio, if you play remotely in a stream, you always need one person who is technically hosting the stream, and this person can't perform. So it was the technical demands that brought up the role that one person is listening actively and taking care of everything. But then we also, during the lockdowns, we had some people that said, I don't feel well performing with you, just sitting alone in front of the computer. Can't we change the setting? And then sometimes there were technical problems. So we always had like at least one person just listening and not playing, but being an active part of the group. And this kind of brought up the idea that we made an institution out of it. Then in every performance, we have an active listener. And this listener is always a part of our group, and he or she is involved in the process. And it's just not just a passive thing, but it's sort of actively contributing. And it also helps us because it creates for us the feeling that we have like one very direct, close audience member. And that's actually a very nice feeling.
Yeah, interesting to hear. Thank you. I had a question, and has anyone else popped questions in the chat window? Let's have a quick look. Hang on. Where is it? Oh, there we go. Bear with me a second. Okay, I'm gonna dive in with my question then. I was curious about the ways in which you've kind of adapted in response to the pandemic. Obviously, because you had the history of kind of the things that you've been doing before the pandemic, and I was curious about how these adaptations and changes that you had to make as a result of the pandemic, how that might impact your work post-pandemic. And has it opened up any kind of new possibilities for you in how you think and how you go about what you do?
So I think for us, it hasn't changed much, only in terms that we were not able to really physically meet for a while. But from the beginning, we had that concept of playing remotely, which is also actually, it has been part of radio since the beginnings. Like networked sound is part of what radio is and does since ever. And we really started from that idea. We also used the same tools. So at first we started using Gisby, and Studio Link is relatively new it came up later, and we switched to using it because the audio is much better. And of course, now we enjoy playing with several people physically present in one room. And for a while, we were like always like one person in front of one computer. So that has changed. So we make like little social bubbles. Mostly we have like one little group in Vienna, one in Graz, and one in other places. And of course, then you have like also little groups that are sort of like micro bands inside the big orchestra, and that also creates a different dynamic. But I think we will keep that mode also after the pandemic. And of course, we hope to meet each other. We actually haven't been physically all together in one room ever. And we hope we can do that one time.
Absolutely. Wow, thank you. There was another question, I think this might have been a follow-up question from Neil again. And he says, follow-up, active listener. Pragmatism makes good sense. Does that person feed insight into the group's reflective and aesthetic processes, not just technical confidence monitoring?
Yes, I think so. So I remember like in our last performance, I was the active listener because I was hosting the radio stream. And in some moments I broke my role and I actively participated in the radio studio by switching on my mic. So that was my contribution. And of course, it's not a hard limit that the listeners is only listening. So it's always possible to step out of that role. And we are always actively feedbacking each other. Yeah. So, and it's also part of the process that we can't hear everybody all the time. So very often it happens that one group can't hear the other, or it's just like a one-way connection because of having feedback problem. If you have like multiple mics and speakers on in the same room, it's basically possible to work musically. So this time, for example, here the Graz-based group, we had a pair of headphones and we could listen to the Vienna group only via headphones. So basically we have to sort of imagine what they do and just sometimes maybe going there, taking one ear, taking a listen, and then going back into performing. So it's really, it's also this active listening is part of the musicking process as well, because sometimes you have to imagine what the other side is doing because you can't physically hear.
So there are similarities in a way with what happened in Chrissy's presentation. Sorry.
Yeah, I think
listening is. Sorry.
Yes.
Just one sentence.
Sorry.
Yeah, listening is a big part of improvisation. If you don't listen to each other, how can you create something together?
Yeah.
Yeah, and basically we're all improvisers, so we never do scores. Yeah.
Sometimes we describe it, then we break the rules. Yeah. But I would say, I mean, listening is really such an important practice, not only in doing music together. And I feel that this topic has come up anew, and how to make this practice even more sensitive, because you can't hear each other so many points in the process, in the live process. I think,
especially if you're such a big collective that is changing all the time.
Say something?
Yeah, Christopher also wants to say.
Hello from the bass section. I enjoy the fact that I can't hear what people are doing very well on the other end. I think it's kind of liberating. And we discovered something very funny in that respect a few sessions ago, because we were listening to the Vienna group through these.
Just a quick question. Could you come slightly closer to the microphone? You're a little quiet.
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Am I perceptible now?
You're loud and clear. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. I said, I enjoy the fact that I can't hear the people in the other place to a large extent. it's part of the fun. And one thing that we discovered in that respect that was very helpful for me, or I don't know, helpful, but fun in any case, was we were using these funny little wireless speakers to listen to what people were doing on the other end in Vienna. And Jadi Carboni, who is a dancer, started moving the speakers around the room, and they were doing funny things with feedback and echoes that kind of created this new meta layer, which couldn't exist without this kind of screwed up technology. And it made, you know, the distance material in a way that we could work with it and do new things with it. And so I just wanted to add that comment about the business of listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Some other questions have been posted, but I think because of time, Chris, we may have to move on to you if that's okay. Just for everyone who's asking questions, we are keeping track of them. So we'll do our best to make sure that actually any questions that don't get, in fact, all the questions, whether they actually going to get addressed or not, that we do send, that we will be sending them to the presenters in due course. But Chris, if we can move to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Let me quickly see if anyone's popped up with anything. Oh, yes. Okay. So Ellen says, have you tried to replicate the process used in Alone Together? Did it work again in that it could be layered up, or did knowing the process beforehand impact what you did? Did it need to be spontaneous in that way?
We talked about trying it again, but no one was keen. We sort of felt like it had worked really well. One suggestion was that we might try either Tom or Percy instigating with a slightly different score thing. But yeah, we haven't tried it again. Percy was really keen actually to do it again, his part again, because he felt that he didn't like the sound because he hadn't got a hold of a decent mic at that time. So it was a lot of the room sound. But for me, that's kind of, you know, that is what it is. It's sort of, that's very reflective of the moment that it was made in, where everyone was kind of struggling to get together bits of technology that they could, so they could still keep working together. So it kind of, Percy's a trumpeter. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, Percy plays trumpet. So he was kind of annoyed with himself that his sound wasn't his trumpet sound as he hears it, but had too much of the room sound. So he was keen to do it again. But after I heard kind of what had come out of it, I was like, well, don't do it again because it works really nicely as it is, and he couldn't have replicated that in any way. We have tried something similar to what Margarethe and those guys are trying with Percy's since moved to Hamburg to take a job there, and we did a recording session where we were working with some musicians from Norway. So we were recording some kind of source material for them, and we did a sort of live recording session using a similar technology, actually a kind of audio streaming technology, which had very low latency, and we could kind of play together, even though me and Tom were here in Birmingham recording our end, and Percy was in Hamburg recording his. So we were playing together but recording in two separate locations, and then I sort of stuck them together afterwards and sent them to the Norwegian guys who are now doing something with them. So there is a kind of, you know, we're sort of exploring some of these ideas that have come out of it, but not necessarily in the exactly the same way.
I had a question. Let me just check the chat feed in case anyone else has popped. I don't want to kind of take over. No, I think we're okay. Let's be 100% certain. Okay, yeah, and so actually going to follow us on from what you're just talking about, and also what Margarethe and those folks want about talked about too. The way of kind of, so the two up from your trio, then the two performers are kind of recording their kind of responses to the scores first, and then the third performer is then adding their part afterwards. There's some interesting scope then for creating three versions of a piece, aren't there? Depending on how you pair who's the duo, who's the pre-recorded duo. So actually it's kind of a two-part question. So question one was whether you'd kind of explored that possibility at all. And so the follow-up was kind of what conversations you may have had about how you imagined what the other people were doing versus what they actually did. And the idea of kind of playing with expectations, with any surprises and kind of.
Yeah, so yeah, the first part we did talk about like doing three versions. I think by the time we got all this together, everyone was sort of sick of lockdown stuff, so we were kind of actually looking forward to doing some. This was last August, I guess, so people were looking forward to actually getting together a little bit and playing together in real life. So that idea never kind of came to fruition, and then we haven't quite got around to doing it. But I'm keen to give it a go. And then in terms of the expectations, my expectations were that it wouldn't work in that way, that I thought that I would have to, or what I wanted to do was to get a source audio to kind of edit and manipulate and create something out of that way. I hadn't anticipated that it would work as well as I hope it comes across that it works as a piece. I mean, this is just me saying that it works. You totally free to say that it doesn't work and it sounds like three people playing separately, but there's elements in there that I feel like the coincidences and some of the way that the music comes together, but it is reflective of our practice, pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, where there's certainly links there. So I think that's sort of subverted my expectations. But then, as sort of those quotes from Tom and Percy were saying, they really were imagining those things happening, and whether it was the specific notes or not, it was a kind of, well, I thought you would be doing this kind of thing at this moment, and there was that sort of, even if it wasn't like you're going to be playing an A flat Lydian phrase at this particular moment, it's like you're going to be doing something like that. And then when they heard it, they were like, well, yeah, of course that's how it sounds, because that's what I thought you'd be doing. So that was a kind of weird experience for me. For them, that all those kind of strange language things where they're talking about, I knew you'd be doing this as I was doing this, is sort of reflective of that kind of, it actually met their expectations in some ways, I suppose.
Thank you. What a question coming from Jason, I think, and there's also possibly from survey. Jason says, this is not really a question, but a response to Sophie's piece. At one point during the lockdown, I rewatched the film Midsummer, and there's a scene involving building a really intimate sense of group cohesion and empathy through collective breathing. I was really struck by how this practice of breathing together in close proximity, proximity reads completely differently given our current inability to do so. I think your use of breath is really smart use of this idea. Thank you. So I hadn't quite realised that was all about Sophie's piece. My mistake. Hang on.
That's fine. Move on to Sophie.
I'm just seeing if has anyone else got any questions for Chris? Sophie, was something from you? Alice has got his hand up.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, Chris. Really interested in your piece. Really interested in your processes and also the description that you shared with us. Many thanks for that. I'm wondering actually the kinds of materials that you chose as a trio, or as you chose as a composer. I wonder if this how this works with different kinds of materials. I mean, your materials are very we listen to a long, quiet kind of sound. There are layerings of the sound. I'm invited as a listener to listen to how the sound evolves over a nice long duration. I really love that, actually. I'm wondering if you experimented with different kinds of materials, even like more perhaps active materials, or not.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great question. So this is kind of something in common with Sophie, I suppose. The name of this trio, Stilefel, is taken from two Norwegian words, and Stille means kind of silent or quiet in Norwegian. And it was very deliberately I set it up that way from the beginning as a response to a really loud, noisy project that I'm involved with, that I kind of that just developed into being like a sort of incredibly sort of loud improv band. And I was quite keen to specifically be making quiet music. So that was one of my stipulations at the beginning, that we started from a place of quiet. So everything tends to be at that dynamic level. It does get a little bit more intense, I suppose, or louder. And then in terms of the written material, I'd always, and this keeps coming up in our conversations, said to Tom and Percy, I don't want you to play this, but here it is. It's just, this is an idea of something that we could play. And we kind of keep coming back to those ideas, but we're sort of, things have slowly moved on. And actually, the interesting thing has become like how we play between those ideas and whether we actually even reference them at all. So that they are playing a kind of active role in what's going on, I suppose, in that sense. But I've always been of the opinion that they shouldn't, they're not necessary, that they're just there as a reference if we need them, as a kind of, it was initially like an icebreaker, I suppose, that if that's that horrible expression. But they stuck around.
No, I thought it was fascinating. I was also fascinated, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, watching Percy think. At the beginning I feel as though you could kind of like do that, but I also think that as you put in your abstract, the issue of the latency, that with these long held and quiet tones, that kind of like sorts out that issue of latency, because there's nothing that needs to be rhythmically together, but it's basically about the evolving of the sound and listening as well amongst the players. Is that right?
No, the latency is like 6 weeks long. We're not talking about milliseconds here. We're doing away with that problem. It frustrates me that everything has to be so precisely, and we're obsessed with this, trying to get the latency as short as possible so we can all play together. You don't need to do that. You can get rid of that issue by working with people in a slightly different way. So there is no latency. The recordings are lined up as they happened. So essentially the latency would be as we were playing together. The sort of, as it's played back, the latency in the way it was created is weeks long, because they were created at very different times. So you can kind of address that issue by getting around it completely, I suppose.
Actually, I think you said that in your talk. I'm sorry, but I was
fine.
with other stuff. But
no worries.
Many thanks. That's great. Those are great answers.
If it's okay, we'll shoehorn in one more quick question from Grant for Chris, and then we'll move on to Sophie, just keeping an eye on the time a little. Grant says, what was your contraption on the floor, and how did it perhaps modify the sound?
It's several contraptions, Grant. It's a collection of effects pedals, and yes, it's kind of totally modifying my bass sound, and is essentially, I view it as being part of my instrument these days. It's just my signal chain doesn't stop at the end of the bass guitar; it stops at the end of the pedal board, and that's the sound that I'm creating. And it's similar for Tom. One of the sort of third element of this band at the start was, how can we incorporate this way of playing, me and Tom together, using guitars and effects as an instrument rather than a guitar with effects, and then putting that in a context. Like, how can you make music with that as a starting point, rather than wouldn't it be nice to have some of those effects on this as well? It's like, no, this is the sound that we make, and then how do you build music around that? So yeah, it's essentially just effects pedals, but it's part of the instrument in that sense. All right.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Sophie, there's a question from Grant. Grant says, does Sophie think that the breaking up the artifact added to the sound experience that might not otherwise have been obtained?
Thank you, Grant. So I was rereading the question. So yeah, what I love about Zoom is the way that it fragments sound, and it's so unexpected, and the way that it highlights different people and amplifies their sound. So and listening into everyone's environments, it's all contributing to the overall sound and experience. So that's something that's really important to me, is the consideration of all sounds and everything that happens within a situation being a part of the piece itself. And what I found fascinating from what we were just doing is that I could actually I could never hear myself playing in Zoom normally, but I heard myself through feedback. I think it was through Neil's microphone or speakers, whatever. I just heard myself, and that brought a new element and a new surprise to me in that realization. But also I was really surprised actually how quiet our realization was, for us having not spent time judging sorting out our levels, and I hadn't heard anyone else's environments. I was quite surprised at how quiet our realizations were, so that's something that was surprising. I also wanted to just comment on Jason's comment, because that's really lovely, and I want to say thank you. I haven't actually seen Midsummer, but it's on my list. I think I should say it's collective music making, or breathing, listening, and intimate experiences of music and listening are really important to me, and that's something that at the beginning of lockdown was obviously taken away very quickly, and I wanted to continue doing that and experiencing making music and making a difference with other people and having these collective experiences. So that's why I do what I do and what I'm writing for today.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other questions for Sophie? I have ones I could have got lined up. Okay, I'm going to jump in with mine, but if anyone does, feel free to pop it into the chat window. I wanted to ask about when, for you, you feel that your hopes and intentions with the piece are most present in a performance, and what thoughts you have about whether there are any connections between the moments when this happens, or whether there are connections between the moments when this happens, either within one performance or across several performances.
Sorry, the first bit broke up for me. Can you
Sorry.
Sorry.
So I was interested in when you feel that your hopes or intentions for the piece are most present in the performance, and the kind of second part of that would be whether for you there are any connections between the moments that occurs, either within the same performance or across different performances.
Okay, so I think I understand. So
I can type it into the chat window if that would make
it's all right, I've just put
sense.
captions on
so
I can read
it.
No,
Okay,
it's just
okay.
me not understanding words. So I write music in a way that I think about the listener first and what I want to hear. Like, I pretend I am the only listener, but I think about what I want to hear, how would I like to hear it. So and I use open notation and text scores to create that, or communication. And it's not a very specific idea. I'm not saying this is the exact sound I want to hear. So it's very open, and I'm always surprised, but there is a certain aesthetic that is created from that. So everything, I just find everything is, I don't know how to answer your question. Sorry.
Sorry?
Yeah. Everything
good.
is how I don't expect it, but expect it at the same time. I'm always surprised, and I find it very moving and meaningful.
Cool, thank you. We have a couple of questions, one from Neil and one from Ellen. I'll run through them in the order in which they arrived. Neil, it's a comment. Neil says, in teaching, we found this gating effect of Zoom has a real effect on the quietness of the before a lecture time, really different from the social live. So that's more a comment than a question, I think. Ellen has some questions and says, I wonder how far the visuals are an element of this, or not at all. We couldn't see each other, which is intriguing, but I was aware that I was very conscious of the green square impacting how I was hearing.
Yes, so this is something I was thinking about, and I didn't mention webcams, and everyone chose not to turn on their webcam, so I turned mine off as well, and that was going to be something I was going to try. So first, because this was a like a listening exercise as well as visual, would we be using our visual cues to know when to breathe, so we knew who was breathing, but everyone decided not to turn their webcams on, even though I didn't indicate whether to do so or not. So I found that a interesting way to do this, because I haven't actually played on Zoom without visuals before. And also, yes, the green box, it was quite confusing, because quite often it was jumping on Neil, but then I'd see like a green line underneath someone else, and I don't actually know. For the second version, I partnered up with Andy, and I think I heard Andy once, and then I didn't hear Andy again, because I'm not sure if Andy made a sound or whether the green square was focused on someone else, so it was highlighting their sound over someone else's. So yeah, it's a really interesting factor, the visuals of Zoom. It's something I haven't done before, of having all webcams off. Usually I keep webcams on, and I also use film. So recently I've started to create audio-visual realizations using Zoom by sharing screen and including film. So that's another way that I've used visuals within Zoom, but today was a new one for me.